Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com presents the Strength Coach Podcast, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. PerformBetter.com.
All right, hey everybody, welcome to episode 234 of the Strength Coach Podcast, the official podcast of Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com, the world's best source for strength and conditioning information. Brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. I'm your host, Anthony Arena, and the show notes are located at ContinueFit.com. You can find all my podcasts, Strength Coach TV, and information about my new coaching program. All right, today on the Coach's Corner, I spoke to Coach Boyle about his progress with intermittent fasting and his thoughts on microdosing with athletes. For the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment, Alwyn Cosgrove is back on to talk about 4 more tips for success in the fitness business. For the Functional Movement System segment, Gray Cook continues his series on the functional capacity screen. Today he goes over part 3, where did the FCS tests come from? For the Train Heroic data-driven coaching segment, Adam Doughty talks to Tim Robinson about practical application of athlete monitoring. For the Hit the Gym with the Strength Coach segment, I have on Kevin Neeld, assistant strength and conditioning coach for the San Jose Sharks. I spoke to Kevin all about his assessment and performance profiling and how it affects his program design. Using Dorsiflexion as an example, he goes over that pretty in depth. Strategies to individualize programming in group settings. We also talked a little bit about this idea with using body limitations and with the skills coach, something that the golf world uses a lot. Also talked about workload and recovery monitoring and his upcoming workshop at Mike Boyle Strength and Conditioning on July 14th. It's called Optimizing Adaptation and Performance. It's with James Lavalle and Mike Potenza. I'm going to have a link for that at ContinueFit.com. Spoke to Kevin all about that. Lots of things to get to, so let's get on the phone with Coach Boyle. All right, now it's time for the StrengthCoach.com Coach's Corner with Coach Boyle. StrengthCoach.com, the world's best source for strength and conditioning information. You can try it out for 3 days. Just $1. You'll have access to all the articles, videos, and programs, as well as the best forum on the net. It's the only place to have full access to Coach Boyle. He's on every day answering questions. Check it out at StrengthCoach.com. Coach, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Ian. How are you?
All right, I'm hanging in there. Got some interesting topics for you today that I thought was definitely stuff from the past, but a couple things that were brought up again. But Coach, you actually, let's start out with this one, intermittent fasting. There was a nutrition thread that got pretty interesting, but you said you've had some success with intermittent fasting, and it's just because I eat less. Can you just talk about, like, what do you mean success? Like, what does that mean for you? Are you more energy, less weight? What's going on with your intermittent fasting?
Yeah, less weight. So I've always struggled to I've never struggled to maintain my weight. So it's been very easy for me to be around 185 pounds, but it's been hard for me if I said, hey, I'd really want to be 180, just as a for instance. That hasn't been easy. So this year, I always said my drift is sort of somewhere between 185 and 190. Usually around New Year's, I'm 190. And I'm thinking, okay, I need to get back on track here a little bit. So I really started to play around with this intermittent fasting idea. Probably, I think I went into the spring closer to 190 than 185. And I've probably lost 4 or 5 pounds, which I have not been able to do. So for me, I would look at that and think that's a pretty significant difference, looking at kind of like a 20-year sample of being in a relatively similar spot. So, and I don't really know. It's interesting. It was, I think the thread started with this whole, it was the Gary Taubes thing, I think, right? That actually, and I read the article, and one of the things that I had said was that I'm not going to stop exploring these theories, but maybe we do keep coming back to this place of, and it's kind of, Elspeth gets the head nod here in terms of, okay, maybe she's right, in terms of there isn't this kind of demonic group of, whether it's wheat or carbs or sugar or whatever. It may just be that we're eating too much. And I firmly don't want to believe that, but sometimes you look and think, gee, the evidence sometimes slides in that direction.
Yeah. What does the intermittent fasting mean to you specifically? Are you doing like 16 hours? Does it change every day? Or like, are you doing it 7 days a week? What exactly are you doing?
I mean, if we were looking at for sort of which system, yeah, I'm probably in that like 8-16 kind of thing where I'm trying to basically eat between 12 and 8, and I might be more 7-15, or 9 and 15 rather. Sorry, and so I'm probably doing most of my eating ideally between 12 and 8, but sometimes probably between 12 and 9. And so what it really amounts to for me is not eating breakfast. That's a significant departure when you think of how long we've been kind of adopting this nutrition thing. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. You need to get up and get your metabolism started. The more your metabolism is working, the better your fat burning capability is going to be. And the reality has been none of these systems has ever seemed to work really well for anybody for any extended period of time. When you kind of look at somebody like me and say, okay, we've gone through all of these different kind of high protein, high carb, low fat, high fat, all this stuff over the last 36 years. And what seems to work, and I said this years ago with the whole Hank thing, just try to eat less. I remember saying it was terrible. People got mad at me, but I remember telling Hank, with my really heavy obese clients, I would jokingly say, try to starve yourself. Try as hard as you can to starve yourself. Because I know you can't do it. Because if you look at somebody like Hank was a chronic overeater. So Hank really thinking, okay, I'm going to try to starve myself, would just result in him eating less. Whereas, and I think I said this years ago in that Training the Obese Client or Overweight Client or whatever we called it article, I had always said, when you say to somebody who's overweight, you can eat 5 small meals a day, they think, that's awesome. Instead of thinking, okay, I'd like you to have 3 really small feedings a day, or maybe even 2 medium-sized feedings, one at 12 and one at 6. What you end up getting in the big picture is a really big decrease in calories. And that probably is what really yields the result.
I'll tell you, I always, and Berardi's name obviously, PN came up in that conversation, but I love this idea of it is so individual and everybody's situation is different to say, hey, Mike, can you do, is 5 small meals on a scale of 1 to 10? Do you think, what would you consider? Do you think, is it a 9? Can you get that done? Or is 3 meals easier for you because of your work situation? Whatever, when they do answer that 9 or 10, that could be the way you go. But like you said, at the end of the day, isn't it just, having less calories?
Yep. But I do think, and it's funny, even in John's stuff, one of the things, he wrote an article about eating for your body type. And I still do believe that there is some issue with sugar and obese people in terms of people who are overweight do tend to, at least in my indication, not only do they tend to be heavier sugar consumers, but for whatever reason, they don't deal with sugar as well. I've always said, if you look at any of your ectomorphic friends, they can eat whatever they want. One of the things you always say, look at him, he can eat whatever he wants. And they can. They deal well with all classes of nutrients. They deal well with protein, fat, carbohydrates. They can seemingly have unlimited amounts of carbohydrates, unlimited sugary beverages, and they don't put weight on. And some of that is, okay, that is the way that they are. And then you look at one of your overweight clients and you think, here's somebody who's, for instance, someone who might try a zone type diet, 40, 30, 30, that type of thing, and not be successful. And you think that person, okay, if I shift that person really heavily towards protein, are they going to do better? And they do tend to do better. So I think there is some sort of macronutrient piece to this thing. But I also think a big part of it is very much related to figuring out a way to get somebody to eat less.
Absolutely. I'm actually listening to The Addictive Brain by The Great Courses right now. And it's mostly talking about drugs and alcohol, but they do mention like caffeine. I just got to that part. And I think exactly what you just said. How come some people can drink and not be alcoholics. Some people can have, smoke and not have lung cancer, right? And give it up pretty quickly. But other people, their brain is affected differently. I'd certainly think that's definitely the case with certain foods and certain people. It just seems to be the case.
Yeah, and there is. And it's very interesting because I think, I don't know if it was you. No, it wasn't you. Someone sent me that Willpower Doesn't Work book, which I started to read a little bit of too. And that's a lot of part of what that guy talks about is just that it's not about willpower. It's about changing your habits. And that goes back kind of to the Berardi precision nutrition idea that I think there is a much larger psychological component to this. But part of that psychological component may be getting that person used to eating less and used to less emotional eating. Yeah. Oh, I don't feel good, I'll eat. Or I'm unhappy, I'll eat. I'm happy, I'll eat. And even we've said one of the things in our house is we tend to center around eating. What are we going to do? Let's go eat. And so as a result, eating is very tied with kind of feeling good. In what are we going to do? We'll go to dinner. And you can end up in a situation where it's like, oh, let's go to breakfast. Let's go to lunch. Let's go to dinner.
Yeah.
And then even just you get into the whole aspect, by eating outside of your house, you consume more calories. That's been proven when you start talking about food that's prepared by somebody else versus food that's prepared by you. So the cool thing about it, and I think it's the cool thing we talk about with almost all of the topics that we deal with, is that we're always still in the process of finding a better answer.
Yeah, agreed.
And that's great.
Yeah. By the way, the Willpower Doesn't Work, which is Benjamin Hardy, by the way, but it's more about the environment that he was talking about as much as habits, right? It's more change your environment. Like if you hang around, it's the same thing with the people you're hanging around with. If you're hanging around somebody that's always wants to go grab a little extra food, or, oh, Mike, come on, just have dessert with me, or which happens a lot with spouses, or, it is a lot about the environment and the people that you're with. That's really what he does talk about in that book, Willpower Doesn't Work. It's a great book.
Yeah, it was funny. I really enjoyed the beginning of it, but it was in one of my my ADD phases where I had 6 books going at the same time, and now I've to kind of hone in on a couple,
yeah,
as opposed to being all over the map. But the bad part is I started reading a little fiction again in the summer, and that really screws me up because I get addicted to these kind of spy novel things, and then I can't stop reading them either.
That's all right. You need a little break. It's your periodization for reading.
Exactly.
Coach, I thought this was interesting. The microdosing conversation, just talking about some, from what he understood, Craig Edwards is talking about this, during the in-season periods when teams are practicing daily, coaches are essentially having their teams come in before practices, but not nearly doing as much, giving their athletes smaller doses of training, but more consistently. So they come in, they roll, stretch, dynamic, 2-3 exercises, go to practice. Just give us your thoughts on this.
I love the idea, and I think that's kind of what we do anyway in some degree. He was talking about it more, I think, as an in-season tool. And I had first heard, Cam Joss was the first one who kind of used the term in one of his podcasts that I listened to. And this was kind of back around the time we did the seminar in New York City that he was at, and I listened to a bunch on my way up to watch Michaela play. And he had kind of mentioned it, and I thought, well, we kind of microdose anyway because we don't tend to be high-volume lifters. So a lot of times for us, it's, kind of warm-up set in 1 set or warm-up set in 2 sets, which really sort of fits into that microdosing idea. But I also said the downside of the microdosing idea in the thread that Craig was talking about is spooking your coach when your coach thinks they're lifting every day. And so I think some of it, again, and everything goes back to some other article, but it's sort of that learning to speak coach and learning to speak athlete and making sure you're not making your coaching staff nervous by having them think, oh, we're going to lift every day. And they're going to freak out. We can't do that. We're never going to recover. We're never going to be able to play, because it's realizing, too, that your coaching staff does not, unless you really fully explain your thought process, they don't understand it. And even if you fully explain your thought process, they may not understand it. So I just think you have to be careful. And I don't know if I talked about that specifically, but I told you, and I hit it in another thread, when the guys from Tottenham came over last year, I thought they had done an amazing job of. They showed me, they were like, oh, these are all of our different warm-ups that we do. And one warm-up was like a little plyo workout, and one warm-up was a little core workout, and one workout was a little bit more posterior chain orientation. And I thought, wow, they've done a really good job of getting what some people would describe as these kind of micro doses of disguised training into the process. And I think you really can do that if you're intelligent about it. But I think exactly that. You have to be intelligent about it. You have to make sure that the coaches understand what you're trying to do, and you have to make sure that the athletes understand what you're trying to do, or you just have to make it seem like it's something else.
Yeah, and it's funny because I have somebody on the tour, on the LPGA tour, and early on in the season, I had to come up with literally 12 workouts, because one was if you have an afternoon tee time, if you have a morning tee time, if you want to just do some power, if you only have the warm up at the hotel room, if you have a warm up at the course. I mean, so many different situations come up, but they ended up being kind of like microdosing, like very smaller workouts. And now she's like basically playing every single week, because she's kind of bouncing between Symetra and LPGA. So she's trying to play with every single week, which obviously I think is a mistake. But the bottom line is I need to even break those down more, because she's having a hard time. Because you know how they get when they get out there. They just, they see the other girls practicing. Now they got to practice, and it just becomes like a disease. So just an interesting idea.
I did that. When I first started writing in-season lifting programs for my NHL guys, it was basically, there was, okay, you're going to lift after a game, and you have the next day off, but a game in 2 days. So it's a Tuesday night lift, Thursday game. Or you're going to lift, and it's a Tuesday night, and it's a Friday game, but you want to have Wednesday off. Or you're going to lift on Wednesday because you've got Wednesday, Thursday, and you don't play till Friday. And it was the same idea in terms of developing all these different scenarios for people and looking and saying, okay, here's minimal effective dose. Here's micro dose. Here's sort of ideal dose, and I think that's kind of the genius of in-season training, is being able to figure out, okay, what we would do in season on those post-game nights. We're like, okay, we play Tuesday, we play Thursday. It's like we're going to do a little five exercise hit workout. Give me one set of chin-ups. Do as many as you can do. A guy might come in and do 6 chin-ups. All right, bang out 6 one-leg squats on each leg. Give me, a set of bench press at, 185 for as many reps as you can do. And boom, 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 guy'd hit 5 things and be out of there, and he would have literally done 5 sets, and it might have taken him 5 minutes. But you really, that's like, okay, that's that minimum effective dose. We got the least amount in that we could, but we got a workout in. And then other nights we'd look at it and say, oh, we're going to play Tuesday, Thursday. But, okay, let's get 2 sets in because the guys are feeling pretty good. And then we're going to play Tuesday, Friday, and we're going to practice on Wednesday so everybody will be here. So I think it's a really cool way to think. You just have to be careful in this sort of learning to speak coach kind of world. Because it's funny, I've talked to some guys, and my experience, obviously, I always talk about sort of what lens are you using, but my lens is more of a hockey lens. And there are getting to be more guys who don't mind lifting on game days. Guys will come in the morning and get a lift in, and then come that night and play the game. And they'll do just a little, might be a little micro dose. Hey, I like to come in and clean, or I want to come in and do some jump squats, or whatever it is. And then there's other guys who want absolutely positively no part of that.
Yeah. Well, what I find the interesting 2 things there is what I've found with my golfers was coming up with certain things that I would do on game day that it's more about mentally how they're feeling, and they ended up loving it because it is this kind of micro dose. Like I would do some power work and then some like one round of one set of everything, like you just said, a similar idea, and they feel like I had couple guys that just really absolutely loved that, and some other guys that don't want to, they just didn't want to do anything on that day because they were worried, and so I think the psychology of it is definitely an important piece there.
Absolutely. Psychology, I mean, goes back. One of the other articles I wrote, the Alan Cosgrove quote of psychology trumps physiology every time, and it's true.
Yeah. Coach, one thing too, I did a Strength Coach TV with Darryl Nelson in USA Development Center, Hockey Development Center, and what they were finding is, they have games on Friday and Saturdays, and they found that when they did the Saturday morning skate, because they were like heavily monitoring the team, was that they were shot on that Saturday night. They saw how much and it was a light skate. In the morning, just the fact that they, I guess, maybe psychologically too, the stress of having to, oh man, we got to go back to the rink. We just played last night. They had school all week. They were working out. So they actually eliminated that Saturday morning skate and found that they've had a lot more success with that. So again, it has to do with what that schedule is.
Well, it does too. And I think sometimes, again, this goes back to the what's your lens idea. You'll be proud of me because in the talk I did last weekend for the National High School Strength Coaches Association, I talked a lot about that, the lens idea, what's your lens and how does your lens evolve? But the pregame skate thing is, I think, a leftover from when you had kind of the old hard drinking NHL guys, and you wanted to get the guys in the morning, get a look at it, make sure everybody get out of bed, that kind of thing. And now when you see how much emphasis people are putting on sleep, the fact that you're going to cut down on sleep, particularly for young kids in that 16, 17 age bracket, I'm noticing with Mark. Mark sleeps a massive amount right now. And I used to worry about that and think, that's teenagers that just want to lay around in bed all day. But I think it coincides a lot with growth spurts and kids actually when they need more sleep, they'll get it. And then as you get older, you don't need as much sleep, you don't get it. And so I think you do have to be, it's hard because you're always trying to be conscious of, am I looking at laziness or am I looking at somebody who's actually intelligently adapting to their circumstance?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's got to be something to it when every teenager is like that.
Yeah.
All right, good stuff. All right, Coach, we're going to let you go on that note. Thanks again, and we'll speak to you next time.
All right, thanks, Ian. I appreciate it.
All right, hey guys, right now at Perform Better, they got the Spend More, Save More sale going on. 20% off if you spend $150 or more, 15% off if you spend $100 or more, and 10% off if you spend $50 or more. Combine that with some of the sale items, you got a great deal. Don't forget the summits are here. Providence actually this weekend, June 29th to July 1st. Chicago on July 27th to the 29th. And Long Beach on August 17th to August 19th. You can check out more at performbetter.com for all their products and info on their educational seminars.
Hello guys, welcome back. This is the Business of Fitness section. My name's Alan Cosgrove from resultsfitnessuniversity.com, and this week I have 4 more tips for success in the fitness business. Number 1, standardize your service and create a replicable system to deliver that service. The best example of this in the world is McDonald's. A McDonald's burger is the same all over the world. Now, I know you're a trainer and you're thinking McDonald's is poor food quality, etc., etc. Get your business head on for a second and look at that deliverable. They're delivering it the same every single time worldwide, right? They can do that. Starbucks has 17,000 locations and they can make the coffee the same way in all those locations, but we can't have 2 trainers running a group class the same on a Monday and a Tuesday, right? We got to do better. So all your program design systems, your evaluation, the way you run a training session should be documented and standardized. If you don't have that, if you don't have it written down, and if you don't do this, then you're winging it. Now, particularly if you hire a new staff member, getting great results with people and having a successful business is far too important for you to improv. improvise, right? So it's far too important for improv. So standardize your service so that the client gets the same experience every time, right? And then they know if they refer a friend, they're going to get a consistent experience. Number 2, produce that result as quick as possible without cutting corners, right? From making hamburgers to cutting hair to training people, speed still wins in business. If you can deliver the same result as your competition in 50% less time, then you are worth 100% more. So always look to tweak your methods and develop better strategies to get results. Are all your clients taking supplements that you think would be helpful? Are they all taking post-workout shakes? Are they doing their recovery work, foam rolling? Are they keeping a nutrition log so you can check for anything that's going on? All of those are imperative. So that's number 2. Produce the desired result as quick as possible. Anything you can do to speed up results has to be in place. Number 3, market relentlessly, right? You've got to continue to market. And I know trainers are like, I don't like marketing. Well, the average person sees something like 1,000 Facebook posts a day right now. If you're one of them, well done. You're barely making a dent, right? You've got to be marketing relentlessly to continue to let people know what you're doing. Marketing is just communication, right? You're not blowing your own trumpet, although you should, but you're just getting your message out there and letting people know that you're there and you can really help. And lastly, be goal driven. If you don't have a written set of your goals with you pretty much at all times, you should be carrying it around with you, or at least somewhere where you can see it, then you're not goal driven. Napoleon Hill talked about this in 1960 in chapter 2 of Think and Grow Rich. And here we are in 2018, 58 years later, and some people don't get it. If I called you right now on the phone, you should be able to tell me exactly where you are in relation to any goal you have. So if you have a goal to make $100,000 per year, that's about $2,000 a week. Working 5 days a week, that's $400 a day. On an 8-hour day, that's $50 per hour. Today, the day we're recording this, it is Monday at 12 o'clock. That means we're 4 hours in. Have you generated $200 so far? Are we on track to make that 100K? If not, we got to take immediate action to change course and get back on track. So this is a quote I'm going to leave you from Stephen Oliver, who I talked about a couple of weeks ago. To be successful, you must first make a decision. You can call it a goal or you can call it setting a target, but you must decide then and there that there will be no excuses and you will make it happen. That's it for this week, guys. Take those ideas to heart. Standardize your service. Do anything you can to speed up the results. Market relentlessly and be goal-driven. And any questions, as usual, reach out to me. Results Fitness University over on Facebook or resultsfitnessuniversity.com, or of course in the Strength Coach Forum in the business section.
Welcome to the Train Heroic Data-Driven Coaching segment. This is Adam.
And this is Tim.
We're here to demystify the idea of athlete monitoring today.
Oh, yeah.
So we talked a little about this in our first segment, way back in the day. But we're going to dig a little deeper here. So let's take a specific example, right? Let's talk about athlete readiness surveys.
Cool.
So there's 3 different things I can think of to use that for off the top of my head.
Yeah.
And the first one is this idea of athlete readiness, of athlete monitoring, which is more like a long-term kind of tracking the ups and downs over the course of the season. Tell me about that a sec, Tim.
Yeah, so we all have to understand that the main reason behind, collecting this data is to optimize performance. And if you look at for example, a pre-competition phase, say it's August, right? Your football players are coming to campus. That's going to be a very high stress period, okay? They're going to be working their butts off in the weight room, okay? They're also going to be working at max capacity on the field, which is what the head coach really wants to see. So you got to use this information to your advantage to optimize performance in the weight room, your central focus, as well as make sure that you're on course to win games.
Right. So, really, in that case, what you're doing is you're just keeping tabs on people, kind of tracking their trends so you can tell whether some threads are starting to fray, and whether there needs to be some kind of intervention.
Absolutely.
Right. That's the idea of this long-term monitoring.
Yeah.
So the second thing is I can think of hey, if you and me, Tim, are training together and you come in, every day I should, and I'm going to ask you, hey, how you doing today, Tim?
Yeah, asking questions, man.
And that conversation could go on for 5 minutes. Say, hey, I didn't sleep well last night. I'm feeling, whatever. So that opportunity doesn't really exist on the team level.
No, it doesn't. And that's a really good time where you can implement some sort of self-assessment that the athletes can do. It's going to get you back some really good data, right? Sleep quality, are they getting the proper nutrition? And it's not going to be super burdensome, right? The last thing you want to do is overstress these athletes at that point in time by adding extra work. So keep it simple. Ask them a few questions that they can fill out on a piece of paper or in Train Heroic with our sweet surveys, and get that information, and don't overwork yourself or overstress those athletes.
Yeah, for sure. So, those surveys we built take 10 or 15 seconds.
Yeah.
They give you a nice kind of snapshot of how somebody's doing.
Yeah.
Those are just going to be super handy. That third thing that I was thinking of, it goes along with this self-assessment piece, but it's self-reflection, right?
Nice.
It's that kind of shining a light on yourself, which is to say, hey, I answered that I slept like garbage last night. I also answered that I feel like garbage across the board.
Yeah.
Is there a relationship there? Who knows?
Yeah, and that's really important, right? You want these athletes not only to be aware and be respectful of one another, but to be self-aware and to be self-respectful and realize how that's going to have a positive influence on their training.
Yeah, I think that, as much as you can kind of say, like, sleep doesn't matter, like an athlete might try to lie to them. It's hard when you have this internal reflection that says, like, yep, didn't do so hot today, didn't feel so hot today, maybe something's got to give.
Right.
That's going to do it for us today. Go to trainheroic.com to start your 14-day free trial. When you're talking to one of our representatives, be sure to tell them the Strength Coach podcast sent you for 10% off a year of the Pro or Elite Edition.
Welcome to the Functional Movement Systems segment. My name is Greg Cook, and I'd like to talk today about the fundamental capacity screen.
Part 3. Where did the FCS tests come from? Well, actually, the FCS tests are tests that we've seen used throughout strength conditioning for the most part. We've had to create some hybrid tests, and we've had to make some adjustments, but the inspiration for the FCS did not come from those tests. And in the last episode, I told you to write down tests, and a lot of times in fitness and conditioning, we just arbitrarily grab exercises and tests with a lot of hope. And if you're working on one of my kids, you're working on my wife, you're working on my parents, you better bring a little bit more than hope if you're a professional. All right? If you tell me you're going to hit a target, you're going to hit a target. If you tell me this is going to be a good surgery, I'm expecting to wake up. And if you tell me this is going to be a good flight, I expect you to land. Do not guess about my exercise prescription or program design. What gets measured gets done. So we know that there's movement patterns that are fundamental in the first year of life. But after that baby is upright and walking, they have the ability to locomote their body in many different ways and manipulate things with their hands and feet. Locomotion and manipulation is pretty much the way we communicate with our environment and our surroundings and even the people that come in contact with us. Long before we have language acquisition, we have touch, we have feel, we have kinesthesia. We already know light and dark and hard and soft and rough and smooth, and we can tell the difference in human touch and objects. And in that first year of life, we map out our movements. And in that second year of life, we map out our environment. How do we do that? Run, jump, carry, and climb. All right? Now, run, jump, carry, and climb. These are the activities universally seen by kids. What will interrupt those activities? A fundamental flaw in movement development, a situation where their little sensory system is either turning things up or down too much, a child that's not sleeping, eating, or in distress and fearful is not going to go through these things. But if they got a nice full belly and they're working off of a good night's sleep and they're adequately hydrated and they've been cuddled and loved a little bit, they will start exploring their environment. They will get bumps and bruises and falls. And I guess Aristotle said it best, pain is life's greatest teacher, but it's a real quick teacher if you listen. And it's a really inconvenient teacher if you're not aware. If we look at run, jump, carry, and climb, and say, all right, which one of these is the most primal? Well, climbing comes right from crawling. And what does that say to us? Reciprocal upper, lower body movements. Well, bear crawls are really popular, and they're a great exercise, and I use them all the time, but I don't do it as a test because it's not a good test. Too many variables. What's one way I could tell the most potentially worst and best bear crawlers in a group? Well, if I really had a bunch of grad assistants that needed a thesis, I would do a Y balance test on the lower body and a Y balance test on the upper body. That's 3 degrees of reaching while posting on one leg or one arm. Okay. Basically, you could almost call it a 3D pistol or a 3D plank. Now, that's long testing. You're going to have almost 20 minutes invested mapping that out. If you're working with a world-class athlete or somebody who needs exceptional rehabilitation, might be worth the investment. What have we done? Well, we tried to take the best of the Y balance test, which is a test, and turn it into a screen. That means it will have less predictive value, but really good compartmentalization value between what? Pass and fail and pain provocation. I can do a forward reach and a cross-body reach with each arm and each leg and basically say your extremities are a match set and your body quarters up in a symmetrical and functional way. If you have pain in either of those 4 patterns, then you probably won't be asked to bear crawl today because you got a health problem, not a bear crawl fitness problem. But if you've got crawling, you've got climbing, and we've got baselines that are body relative that you should be able to cover in your lower and upper body reaches. Simple as that. Is your balance and motor control limb by limb adequate and symmetrical? That covers crawling. Let's investigate the others in the next episode.
All right, now it's time for the Hit the Gym with the Strength Coach, and today I have on Kevin Neeld, who's the assistant strength and conditioning coach for the San Jose Sharks under Mike Potenza. Before that, he was the strength and conditioning coach with USA Women's National Hockey Team, as well as the president and director of performance at Endeavor Sports Performance in New Jersey. He has 2 books out, Ultimate Hockey Training and Ultimate Hockey Transformation, with a 3rd one coming out, Speed Training for Hockey. He just spoke at the 2018 NSCA Training for Hockey Clinic, and he has an upcoming workshop that he's doing with Mike Potenza and James Lavalle, and that is Saturday, July 14th at Mike Boyle Strength and Conditioning, and that's called Optimizing Adaptation and Performance. So the 3 of them will each do 2 lectures all day. It's going to be a great day. Kev, thanks for doing this.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, well, excited about you guys coming over to the East Coast here, first time back with just without coming with the team, or have you been back and forth?
I've been back to the East Coast a couple of times, but it's always quick. It's always quick in, quick out. Doesn't seem like I get to see all the people I'd like and spend as much time back on the coast that I grew up on as much as I'd like.
Yeah, well, California's not too bad either.
No.
Kev, let's talk about right now, I just want to talk about some of your 2 lectures, and the first one is structural assessment and performance profiling with integration to program design. Structural assessment. What do you mean by that? What is this?
So the talk as a whole, Anna, is really just going to focus on how can we profile athletes, and then when you go through this testing process, how can you make the best use of that data, of that testing information. And when I say structural assessment, really what we're looking at is movement profiling. So get an idea of how different joints move throughout the body, try to understand if there's any range of motion limitations, if there's any side-to-side discrepancies, if there's any kind of patterns that emerge from looking at relationships between restrictions at different joints throughout the body, and then trying to put that within the context of injury risk patterns, but more importantly, within the context of performance. I think that because of the attention that's been paid historically to movement restrictions and movement competency with injury risk, that tends to be the lens that we look at movement through as an injury risk factor. And really, I think we should be paying more respect to how range of motion and movement competency can influence performance. I think range of motion is just as much of a performance indicator as it is an injury risk factor. So, when we look at movement screening, there's kind of 2 different lenses that it can influence performance. And, one, obviously you have to be able to get into certain positions to be able to move efficiently for the sport. So looking at it through the lens of sport performance gives you one way to audit range of motion to see, do we have range of motion in different joints throughout the body to be able to get into the positions we need to in the sport? If not, what limitations are we seeing and how might that influence sport performance? And then is there anything that we can do about these? So are these limitations more structural and a little bit more rigid, or are they more soft tissue or neurological and amenable to some sort of intervention? But the other way to look at that is purely from a training standpoint. And it's a similar thought process. It's just a different outcome. So, let's say somebody has a restriction in ankle dorsiflexion range of motion, which is a pretty common one that you see in a lot of athletes from different sports. Well, from a hockey standpoint, we know that they're going to need dorsiflexion to get into a deeper skating position, right? So if they don't have that range of motion, they might adopt a higher skating position, which is going to result in shorter stride lengths, and ultimately it's going to put a ceiling on some of their speed potential. But from a training standpoint, we know that certain squatting patterns are going to require more dorsiflexion. So if they don't have that range of motion, then certain exercises may be better fits for their movement competency than others. So, I think both from gaining a deeper understanding of their ability to get into the positions and patterns that they need to for their sport, I think we can look at movement in different joints through that lens. And I think we also need to look at it as far as pre-qualifying certain exercises for certain athletes and integrating that into how we're designing programs for the athletes.
Kev, are you going to go over your whole assessment in this lecture or just kind of highlight stuff?
So I'm going to go through a broad overview of which assessments we're using and then what type of information I'm pulling from that, and then how that goes into designing programs and how we might be using that, as I mentioned before, as a glimpse into how certain ranges of motion and certain movement qualities may influence performance within sport. But we're not going to spend, hours going through table assessments and actually breaking out into labs about how to go through it. That's not as much the point of the talk is once you have that information, how can you make the best use of it?
Yeah. Well, how long is your assessment?
You mean if I have an athlete and we're going through it from start to finish for the first time? I can get through all the movement stuff in about 10 minutes.
Oh, wow. Okay. Nice. So what are you generally like? Just give us an overview of what you're going to do with that athlete.
Yeah. So I've over time, I've kind of evolved to this assessment process, and, I think you learn new information and you're always adding things in, and then you get to a point where it's too lengthy of a process to go through to make it logistically feasible in a lot of different scenarios. So, you kind of fine tune it and maybe get rid of some stuff that aren't directly impacting your program as much as some of the other things that are still in there. But in general, and with almost everybody, we'll go through a seated hip rotation with a goniometer, just to get an idea of internal and external rotation. We'll go through a handful of tests that I learned through the Postural Restoration Institute, as far as the Thomas test, just looking at hip extension range of motion, the Ober test, looking at hip adduction range of motion. We'll go through a passive hip abduction test, a shoulder horizontal abduction and shoulder flexion test, and then through functional movement systems, so either the FMS or SFMA, we'll go through their cervical screen, looking at flexion, extension, rotation, ankle dorsiflexion, which is a test I learned while taking the FMS certification, even though it's not technically part of their screen. That was something Brett Jones showed us while we were there. Then the active straight leg raise, shoulder mobility test, and then a seated T-spine rotation test. And then we also do the Y balance lower quarter test too. I think that those posterior medial and posterior lateral reach patterns they're good global indicators for lower body range of motion and control, but I think they're also the closest proxy to an off-ice stride length measure that we can get and consistently monitor over time and use that to it's a lot easier to go through a wide balance test screen than it is to somehow get an indication of stride length while they're actually skating on the ice. So that's kind of the general breakdown of the test that we'll look at.
Yeah, it's funny because like what you had said, over the years, you've taken so many courses. And I know, obviously I've known you for a long time, and I know all the letters behind your name if we really wanted to put them there. So it must be, just you've had to take a lot out in terms of, all of these things that you've seen and really, kind of getting it down to what's practical.
Yeah. And I started with, I think the first movement assessment course I ever took was the functional movement screen. And, I think there's a lot of value in that. And then, I was introduced to PRI, and I've gone through a lot of their courses. And then I've gone through SFMA and TPI and, eventually functional range conditioning. And I've done some Aldoa stuff. And, it's funny because once I went through, they all have a slightly different way of looking at the human body and about human movement. And, I think when you're exposed to a few different paradigms, you start to realize that at some point, everybody in the room is going to fail somebody's test, right? Nobody is going to go through and clear all the FMS tests, clear all the PRI tests, clear all the, Aldoa positioning, being able to get in and control some of those positions. So, really it's not as much a matter of, to me, about saying, well, you shouldn't train if you don't have this ability. It's more trying to boil it down to a few different tests that are going to give me information that I think is going to either directly translate to somebody's ability to compete in their sport, or is going to really inform the exercise selection that we're going to put into their training programs. And, one of the ones that I think I forgot to mention this, but we'll look at shoulder internal and external rotation as well. And that's one of those ones that you might look at training and think like, well, when are you really going through end range shoulder internal or external rotation? And, one of the examples that I use a lot is that if you're teaching Olympic lifts, when you go through that high pull phase, if you're going to do a hang clean or any of those movements, if you don't have internal rotation, that bar is going to drift further away from your body. And if that bar drifts away from your body, not only do you lose a little bit of the velocity and you're not going to be able to move as much weight going through that pattern, but it also means that bar is going to have to swing out pretty wide to get into a catch position. And, trying to teach hockey players to Olympic lift over the years, you see quite a few people that are either hitting themselves in the chin with the bar or they're pulling their whole body forward. And, it just made me start to realize that a lot of the people that really struggled with performing that movement were the guys that, at the same time when you, after the fact, so you kind of beat your head against the wall about why aren't they getting this movement pattern? And then when I started to incorporate looking at shoulder internal rotation into the assessment process, it started to shine a little bit of light on something that I might have missed that may explain why something that's easier for certain players was so difficult for others. So again, we kind of talked about ankle dorsiflexion and squatting patterns, and everything that's in the screen that I'm currently using. Like I had mentioned, it's either going to directly impact their exercise prescription and their training program design, or I believe it's going to have some sort of influence within their sport.
Very cool. Kev, do you think we'll ever get to, and it just reminded me because some of the things that you're talking about here in the assessment, in golf and TPI, the TPI, and a lot of people know about this because it's not really practiced on lower levels because trainers don't partner with golf pros, and golf pros certainly don't want to partner with trainers, and so everybody thinks they're going to do everything on their own. But the real model at TPI is supposed to be, okay, Kevin comes in to see me and he has certain limitations. So I need to talk to the golf pro and we need to change his swing right now based off of what his physical body looks like and, what it's presenting. Because you can't just say, okay, this is the way Tiger Woods swings. This is the way we want you to swing. No, you have to go by what Kevin can do, and we have to maybe make some, some adjustments. So, for example, if you can't rotate around your right hip, we might move, like the golf pro might move your right foot out, and that kind of opens your hip up for some rotation. Obviously, you're going to lose power there, but my real question is, it just made me think of this when you were talking about skating styles. Do you think you'll ever get to a point where you guys are talking to skill coaches about, look, this guy doesn't have it in terms of he's not getting this kind of dorsiflexion. We're gonna maybe have to change his skating style.
Yeah, well, I think if there's a message I'd like to continue to hammer home and impart on anybody that's ever in an audience anytime I'm speaking, it's that we really need to look at things through an individual lens. I think we can all appreciate that people are built differently and that everybody has different physical strengths and weaknesses, and some of that's kind of genetically predisposed. But even with that consideration, a lot of people are still trying to fit everybody into the same training program or fit them into the same movement patterns and skill acquisition patterns in the case of golf or skating. And it doesn't work that way, and I think trying to approach things from a one size fits all standard is not only going to become very frustrating for the coaches, but it's also going to become very frustrating for the athletes. And at the end of the day, they're not likely to get better. Depending on what's being asked of them, we may be putting them in more compromising positions that could lead to pain or injury in the future. So, I can tell you that we are already working with some of the coaches and skill coaches within our organization and starting to have those conversations. And I think it has to move in that direction. And even like the example you gave is a great one. It might be, if something is, if it's more of a neurological range of motion limitation, well, that might be as simple as saying, hey, to the skill coach, maybe you're seeing this pattern because this individual lacks this range of motion, but because of the cause of that restriction, it's something that they can address and overcome with, a couple warm-up exercises before they swing. So I'm going to show them, and then I'm going to tell you what we're doing with them so that when they're with you, you can make sure that they're doing the right thing to put them in a good position to be successful with what you're teaching them. And another example is maybe it's not just a matter of using some strategies to open up range of motion. Maybe somebody really lacks it, and that's going to require a totally different training strategy, a totally different timeline for overcoming that barrier. And then that might be a case where, in that example you gave, that we might need a few weeks to a few months of a slightly altered pattern. And then as you reassess and as that range of motion cleans up, then maybe they have the right hip internal rotation, I think is what you mentioned, to slide that foot back and to be able to perform the skill appropriately from an even stance instead of a staggered stance. But and one of the experiences that I've had is, I gave this example at the NSCA hockey clinic a couple weeks ago, is that we went through in one of the screens I went through, we had this athlete where hip external and internal rotation were both significantly limited, among the worst I've ever seen. Ankle dorsiflexion was limited, T-spine rotation was limited. And the result of that was that those two Y balance patterns that look like skating strides were extremely limited compared to any standard that we've looked at, whether that's using the NHL Combine, whether that's using our own historical database. They were extremely low compared to any population. And over time, through some of these different strategies, we were able to significantly improve hip rotation on both sides. We were able to significantly improve dorsiflexion and T-spine rotation. And there were drastic improvements in those two stride patterns. And talking to the athlete, he said that he definitely felt like he was able to get into deeper skating positions on the ice. He felt like, his stride was a little bit longer. He was generating more power. And from our point, watching him skate, there were definitely improvements. But it was interesting because he met with a skating coach, and the skating coach started to ask him about what skates he'd used historically and what he's skating in now, and had mentioned that with this newest model of skate, that the top lace was a little bit higher. So a lot of players have to loosen that top lace a little bit more to allow their ankles to go through more of a dorsiflex position. So the player did that, made that change to how tight he tied his skates, and immediately his skating looked better. So that's an example where the integration with the skill coaches is really an important piece, because we unlocked all this range of motion that he was only able to make partial use of because of some limitation in his equipment, that the skating coach with a different perspective was looking there first. And through our conversations, we were able to say, we've checked these boxes from a movement competency standpoint. So he knew that those wouldn't be issues. So then he automatically starts looking at other possible limitations. And, the skate thing kind of popped up as being a really important factor for this player. So,
yeah. And that's the same thing with TPI, because when they talk about the hexagon of player improvement, the 6 things, the golf skills coach, right? The golf pro will talk about skills, different, the basic, stance and grip and all that. And then there's shot making skills. So there's different shots that you need to have in your bag. And then there's course management. So they handle all that. There's the mental game. That's number 4. There's the physical part. That's 5. And number 6 is equipment. And what I always loved about Titleist was one is not more important than the other. They're all working. You need all of these things. You just gave a great example of exactly what they do. I mean, at TPI, they're even looking at that. That's what they do too. They look at the shoes. They really focus on what your foot looks like and what kind of shoe you should be in. So it's amazing that you guys are starting to do some of that stuff as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more fun too, to be perfectly honest with you, where you can start to have those conversations with everybody that, may have a different perspective on what performance means to them. I think from a strength and conditioning standpoint, we tend to, especially in hockey, that's obviously played on a sport, it has some unique challenges because of playing on skates and playing on ice. But, we have our areas where we're looking at movement a certain way, and we're looking at speed and power and strength and different components of conditioning in one way. But without feedback from coaches and from scouts and management and skill development coaches, we're definitely missing a huge piece of how what we're doing away from the sport translates to what they're doing within the sport. And, I've worked with people in the past that weren't weight room strong, that when you ask the coaches and you talk to them about their style of play, they would say that the player's strength and ability to protect the puck and to win battles in the corners and those elements of the game where strength is really coming into play, that might be a really strong point for that player. So how you're interpreting their lack of off-ice strength or lack of weight room strength may change a little bit, knowing that, for one player, if they're weak off the ice and they're weak on the ice, then getting them stronger off the ice is an appropriate starting place to hopefully translate to their on-ice game. Whereas another player, if they're, kind of middle of the pack strength off the ice, but they're really strong on the ice, then, you might want to look in a different direction as far as what you can do from an off-ice perspective that's going to best translate and help their game on the ice.
Yeah, it's amazing. I'm still working with one hockey player, a young kid. You and I have talked about this off the air about this kid, and he's smaller, but he's super smart, and he uses his body so well that he's able to look. I mean, he's strong out there, and he can play with these bigger kids because of his ability to understand those positions. And so you're right. It's interesting to make sure you're getting this whole team involved. And when you do that, that's when you're going to have that success. Good stuff. What are some strategies to individualize, just talking about that, the programming in group settings? Because that's always going to be our big, concern with my listeners is, hey man, I got, 700 guys here, but how do you do that?
For me, it comes back to, I always try to look at things as if I only had one athlete and I was only responsible for them and the success of my career depended on my ability to help this individual make progress, how would I design a program for him or her? And I like to start there and then reverse engineer the closest version of that I can based on the logistical constraints of the circumstances that I'm working in. And, I think part of it, this isn't to discount very real, legitimate constraints on the amount of time you can spend with somebody and the resources you have available and how many athletes, any one coach might be responsible for. But I also think that sometimes it's easy to say, well, I think everybody's going to benefit from this, or, some people might really benefit, but it's definitely not going to hurt the rest of them. And we almost talk ourselves into justifying why one program is the best fit for everybody, opposed to understanding how a more individualized approach would be better, and then trying to do the best we can with the constraints we have. But based on that, hopefully that makes sense. But I think there's a lot of different ways you can individualize programs, based on assessment findings from a movement standpoint and based on injury history. You can put a roster up on a wall that has some individualized soft tissue and rolling work on it that guys can work on just by going up to the sheet, seeing their name, seeing which protocol or which areas they should work on, and then doing that stuff as part of their own warm-up. A lot of things like that, it takes a little bit of teaching up front, and then the athletes can do it on their own. It's not something that really needs to be coached or that needs to take a lot of time away from the limited time that most coaches have with their athletes. We've taken a similar approach with corrective work or with strategies to help overcome some of these movement restrictions that I mentioned earlier. And, again, if you can start to cluster the team into a few different movement restrictions, like maybe you have a handful of guys that really need to work on ankle dorsiflexion, a handful of guys that need to work on T-spine rotation, a handful of guys that need to work on hip external rotation, then you can put them in these small groups and then just show one group one, have them work on it, then go to the next group, show them the other one. And then by the time you get through a few of these clusters, you can circle back to group one and then show them what the next thing might be. And again, it's one of those things that the first time you do it, it's teaching intensive up front and it's a lot of work. But after you go through it, anybody in a team setting, if there's a good training culture there, you're going to have a couple guys that don't mind showing their teammates how to do a certain exercise. And, within any group, there's going to be a handful of really good training students that as a coach, you can trust them to show their teammates how to do something the right way. So, I think individualizing soft tissue work is one, individualizing corrective work is two, adjusting exercise selection. So, kind of looking at different components of the movement screen and understanding, does somebody lack full overhead range of motion? And, can we make some tweaks to their program based on finding solutions like a landmine press instead of an overhead press, or, maybe a half kneeling lat pull down where you can pull yourself back away from the cable so it's at more of an incline angle instead of a straight overhead angle. Those are kind of examples for that. You could look at somebody with a hip flexion limitation and maybe limit their depth in split squats or in squatting patterns by using pads or boxes. I had mentioned with dorsiflexion limitations, you can go to more vertical tibia options, whether that's, more kind of deadlift variations instead of squatting variations, or even just changing the way, like you can do a split squat with a really positive shin angle on that front leg, or you can do it with more of a vertical shin angle. So kind of tweaking exercise selection based on the individual's movement screen and their ability to demonstrate competency into getting into certain positions. And then the other way is really looking at individualizing the stimulus that you're going for. And there's three different ways to do that. You can alter exercise selection to change what the intent of that exercise is. So, you can look at maybe the team, the whole team's going to be in the squat rack, but the players that need to emphasize strength, maybe they're doing front squats, and the players that have more of a speed power emphasis, maybe they're doing jump squats. So everybody can kind of be in the same area at the same time, doing a movement pattern that's similar, but with a totally different intent for what you're hoping to get out of it. You can alter the loading variables. So, again, if one group needs to work on speed and one group needs to work on strength, then the strength group can go heavier and maybe perform a little bit in higher rep ranges, as far as more in that 4 to 8 rep range, whereas a speed emphasis, they're going to go lighter, and maybe they're in the 3 to 5 rep range. But you can do that with the same exercise without disrupting the flow of the team. And then the last one is just altering the phase sequencing. So, if you kind of follow a traditional periodization model, from phase to phase, generally you kind of flow from this anatomical adaptation into a strength phase, into a power phase, into a speed phase, and then, into some sort of work capacity or anaerobic capacity phase, at least within the sport of hockey. That's kind of the general flow of the way things have gone. But if somebody doesn't need to develop strength as a primary quality, then you can just shift them to transition more and spend more time in phases that are emphasizing their specific needs. And, again, within a team dynamic, that might mean that you have a couple different groups of people that are working off of different programs at the same time. And, that becomes a little bit more of a logistic challenge, but it's not so daunting that it's not possible to do in most team settings. And in football, as it is, you have different position groups that might be working on different things, and that's kind of ingrained in how they organize their training times. So there's no reason that other sports can adopt a similar philosophy and a similar way of scheduling or of organizing their weight room, or maybe of organizing their intern and assistant help to make sure that they have, as you kind of divide up into more groups, that you have more hands on deck to be able to help with those things. So again, I think it's possible. It's a matter of really looking at what you think would best serve the athletes, and then starting to reverse engineer that outcome within the constraints and limitations that you're dealing with logistically.
Yeah, and I think it's just like, obviously it's a little more work. People, you got to do a little bit more work. And if you're planning ahead, something like the CFSC, where they have progressions and regressions, everybody should have those in their toolbox to make sure, okay, this guy's got to regress down 2 or up 1 or whatever, to be able, you got to do that work. So I think there's definitely ways to do it. People are doing it, and they've proven that. So it's out there. So you can't use that as an excuse. Good stuff. Okay, let's finish up with you're doing your second lecture on the 14th at MBSC with optimizing adaptation and performance. Again, that's with James Lavalle and Mike Potenza. You're doing workload and recovery monitoring to drive practice, training, and recovery interventions. We've talked to Devin McConnell a lot about this on here. I know you guys are pretty good friends, and you're doing it a certain way. Talk to us about how you're doing all this.
Yeah, well, I think there's been a lot of attention paid to workload monitoring in recent years, and I think part of that is just a direct result of changes in technology availability has made it easier to track certain things in different sports. And, again, the goal with my presentation is to really start to have a better understanding of what to look for, but then also what to do with that information once you have it. So, in the different settings that I've worked in, I've had access to different tools to be able to do that. Right now, we're using heart rate monitors and subjective wellness questionnaires as kind of our 2 primary strategies for monitoring workload and recovery. And there's been a big focus again on how workload patterns contribute to injury risk, and looking at how short-term spikes and increases in workload compared to what an athlete is used to or has adapted to over the course of previous weeks and months, how those spikes might relate to injury risk. And, one kind of the theme of our conversation here today is that, it's not just an injury risk conversation. I think we need to look at these things as performance indicators as much as they are injury risk moderators. And, the discussion there with looking at how increases in workload or spikes in workload relate to injury risk are really related to fatigue management. So you can get an understanding of, is the load that we're asking the athlete to perform typical of what they've done in the past? Is it an appropriate increase compared to what they've done in the past? And if not, you can use some of these subjective measures or other, if people have access to other objective measures of fatigue within different systems of the body, you can look at that to get an understanding of the outcome of how the athlete is handling those changes in the loads that they're under. And then from there, you can start to make more informed decisions about whether somebody may need to alter the workload that they're being exposed to. Depending on your situation, you may have more or less influence in some of those conversations, but then also on what recovery strategies are going to be most appropriate for that individual. And from a recovery standpoint, there's so many things that are out there now. And again, it's in part an outcome of there being more attention paid to recovery. It's an outcome of technology changes and kind of the free market system that we live in now, where it's easier and faster to copy somebody else's idea and then try to slightly tweak it and put your own spin on it. But from a prescription standpoint, it comes back to understanding the systems within the body that these different modalities are intended to address. And, there are certain recovery strategies that are extremely effective at restoring performance when you're on a tight turnaround from one game to the other, or one testing session to the other, or whatever the circumstances is. But a lot of times those quick returns to performance come at the expense of the athlete adapting to the stimulus that caused that need for a recovery intervention to begin with. And if you look at things as within the context of what is the goal of this time of year, or what is the goal of today or this week of this training cycle, this phase, is it to create some sort of improved performance ability or physical capacity, or is it really to maximize within sport performance and execution? And if you look at it from a broad context of the off season is really about developing capacities and the in season is really about performance, there are certain recovery strategies that you probably want to avoid in the off season, because even though they're going to help return the athlete to a higher level of performance, they're going to do that by blunting a lot of the signaling mechanisms within the body that cause them to adapt to that stress and really to improve physically. So, I think being able to understand the context of workload variations and what's appropriate from an increase standpoint, and what some of the research says as far as, what ratios of short to long-term loading are appropriate as far as fatigue management standpoint. And then a lot of the myths and misconceptions that are kind of surrounding that same body of literature. I think that's a good starting place. And then once you have an idea of whether the athlete is responding favorably or not to the loads that are being imposed on them, now you can circle back to some of these recovery interventions with an understanding of what the goal of that training phase is, which physiological systems those recovery strategies are going to influence, and then make decisions about whether the cost of using that strategy is worth the intended outcome.
I love it, because I think, we do jump into so many things and think, yeah, it's gonna be worth it. It's gonna be great. Everybody's doing this. I want to get in an ice bath right after a training session or whatever. And like you said, maybe the body needs to do that on its own to recover and to adapt. Right?
Sure.
Nice, good stuff.
Yeah. And one of the things that's really popular now and gets a lot of media attention is this whole body cryotherapy, or these, the cryo saunas that are popping up everywhere now. And, if you look at the research in that area, it's a real mixed bag as far as, are there really meaningful changes in inflammatory markers? Are there really meaningful changes in soreness markers that result from that? But the one thing that seems to be pretty consistent is that there is a shift towards a more parasympathetic state after using those implements. So if the goal is to influence the state of the autonomic nervous system, there's probably other strategies that you can use to deliver that same outcome. And maybe that means if you don't have access to those cryo saunas, you can still find another solution. or maybe you have access to it, but athletes are worried about getting into a sauna that has temperatures, 300 degrees below Fahrenheit, and there's some sort of psychological aversion to using that tool, where then you can circle back and say, all right, I know the goal is to induce a more parasympathetic shift. Which recovery strategies fall within that category, and what else can I do to help the athletes that don't want to use the strategy that may be really effective in driving that home?
Yeah, it's funny. PJ Nestler was on last show, and he was just talking about some of these modalities that there has been some research on the fact that if you believe that it's doing you good, then it is. Then it's good for you too. So there is a piece of there is a mental piece to some of those strategies as well. Yeah,
there's no question. And I've always said you want to maximize the placebo effect. So if somebody, because the placebo effect is a real change in performance. So if somebody, if I wanted somebody to, running with that example, if I thought that those cryosaunas were the solution, and I really wanted somebody to do that, and they said, well, I really like doing, I really like meditating or using Muse to do self-guided meditation, and I think that that's also going to result in a parasympathetic shift, and I know that they think that it's going to lead to some benefit, then maybe for them, I'm going to spend more time re-emphasizing the benefits of the strategy that I know that they're going to do, instead of trying to force them into some other strategy that, at least for one outcome, may have a really similar result. So, I think the more you can talk to athletes, the more you can figure out what they like doing, what they'll do consistently when the circumstances warrant it. I think it's not only going to improve consistency and your relationship and communication with that athlete, but it may even lead to a better outcome stemming from their use of it. So I think that's a great point.
Excellent. Well, I want to remind everybody once again, a lot of this conversation is around Kevin's upcoming workshop with Mike Potenza and James Lavalle in Woburn, Mass. at Mike Boyle Strength and Conditioning on July 14th. This is the type of stuff that obviously he's going to be talking about, and you can catch him at lunch and afterwards to get even more conversations. I know there's going to be some afterwards. So Kev, thanks for coming on and talking about some of these topics that you're going to be talking about at Optimizing Adaptation and Performance coming up in a few weeks. So we really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, and it's always a pleasure to be on here, and appreciate your invitation and everybody's willingness to listen.
All right. Well, I'll remind everybody too, we will have links at strengthcoachpodcast.com or continuefit.com as well for you to sign up. So Kev, once again, thanks for coming on.
You got it.
All right, that's going to do for episode 234 of the Strength Coach Podcast. Special thanks to Chris Pryor and the folks over at Perform Better. Right now, they got the Spend More, Save More sale. The more you spend, the more you save. 20% off if you get up to 150 or more. Combine that with some sale items, you got a pretty good deal. The summits are here. Providence this weekend, Chicago, July 27th to the 29th, and Long Beach, August 17th to the 19th. Check out performbetter.com for all their products and info on their educational seminars. Thanks to Coach Boyle and Kevin Neeld for sharing their insights and philosophies into the world of strength and conditioning and performance enhancement. Thanks to Adam Dowdy, Tim Robinson, and Traineroic. Head over to traineroic.com to start your free 14-day trial. Let them know I sent you or the Strength Coach Podcast sent you. You'll save 10% off your first year of the Train Heroic Pro or Elite editions. Alwyn Cosgrove for the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment. Check them out at resultsfitnessuniversity.com. Great Cook and Functional Movement Systems. Check them out at functionalmovement.com. And of course, remember you can try strengthcoach.com out 3 days, just $1. You can cancel at any time if you don't love all the access to the articles, videos, and programs, as well as the best forum on the net. It's the only place to have full access to Coach Boyle. He's on every day. To access that offer, go to strengthcoach.com. Click the Join Now button to get started on your trial. My name's Anthony Rana. Go to continuefit.com for all of my stuff, including the Success Series 5 audio interviews on success in the fitness business. Thanks again, and I'll speak to you next time.